Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Undertaking Satan podcast. This is the long-awaited episode 11. Have you ever wondered what morticians talk about behind closed doors? Have you ever wondered what two satanic morticians would talk about behind closed doors? Well, wonder no more. In this episode, we talk with Kat, who is a funeral director here in America as well, and also a member of the Church of Satan. I think that intro pretty much introduces itself. Without further ado, here we go. Although I am a member of the Church of Satan, I do not speak for the Church of Satan. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We are with Kat, who is another satanic mortician. Kat, how you doing?
Doing pretty good. It's been a long week and it's only Tuesday.
I feel very much the same way. It can get that way sometimes. So, Kat, I'd just like to start off. I know that you've been on at least one other satanic podcast before, which I'll link below. But just kind of for folks who are unaware of you, could you give us the short, skinny on, your involvement with Satanism and your history as a funeral director?
Yeah. I've been in the funeral industry. I guess you'd call me like a little baby funeral director, but I've only been in the industry for about 6 years. Licensed for 3 as a director, which is different licenses in our state. The embalmer is 1, the director is 1, the crematory reductionist is 1. I'm just a funeral director arranger. I think with Satanism, I've only been active in the church for almost 4 years now. But it's kind of something I've always lived without always having the vocabulary for exactly what it was I was doing. But so it's just kind of always been how I've felt and lived in my heart. But becoming more and more active, I did get the chance to go over to New York for the big event that they had over there a couple weeks ago, and that was quite the eye-opening event. It was really phenomenal to get to witness a satanic funeral, and such a well-executed one at that. I'd say out of all the services I've been to professionally and personally, that's probably the sharpest, cleanest service I've ever seen.
Great. Well, I would love to dive into that more with you kind of offline, just for I'm sure that all the satanic folks know exactly kind of who we're talking about and things like that. Very sad, of course. But yeah, that's wonderful. That's something that I've never gotten to do. I've never gotten to officiate or direct a satanic funeral in any way. Have you on your side of things?
No. So my area, while my state overall is, and if you followed me online, you kind of know where I am, because if you've bought bath bombs from me, which will be another topic, you know where I live.
Yeah.
um, the state overall is pretty liberal, but this little corner of the state that I'm in is quite a bit more conservative. We do have some more artsy people, but they have not gotten to do a satanic service. We've had some more pagan leaning ones, but I've not gotten to officiate because I'm not, I don't have that kind of ranking. But I haven't even gotten to work professionally as a funeral director for a satanic service, or, I don't know that there are many Satanists in my town, actually. So if there are, I know of at least one more, but if there are, I would love to connect with them.
Awesome. Yeah, that's kind of my story too. I too have done a few pagan funerals. I guess I've you could say consulted behind the scenes on a quasi satanic funeral, but no, I've never done anything officially for a funeral either. And that seems to be like one of the big questions I get. Do you get that a lot?
No. Yeah, because I just don't think it's very common out here, but a lot of people do know my connection to both the church and my profession. So no, I don't get asked that a lot, honestly, surprisingly.
Gotcha. Yeah, for me, it's more online. I'm pretty much completely under the radar in real life. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, hey, you mentioned it real quick, and I wanted to mention it as well. Your bath bombs, which is, of course, as you like it, bath. Um, yeah, I wanted to talk about my experience with those and how
Oh,
awesome they
please.
are. So, as you know, I ordered my first batch. I think it was Valentine's Day last year, and for Lady Grendel,
Yeah.
and we literally we put them on a little shelf to be used later, and it's in a spot where like the sun hits them as it comes through the window,
Oh.
and they smell so good that like we haven't had the heart to actually use them because they're like,
Oh,
and that's how strong these things are. They're like in cellophane, uh
yeah.
but they still like will fragrance an entire room when they're just a little bit warm. So like,
Yeah, it's pretty impressive that like my whole workshop is a fragrance experience, and it's quite a sunny area too. But yeah, it's powerful. I've had someone use it as a car freshener, just left one in their car.
yeah.
So
Yeah, I don't know if that's definitely not their intended use, but anyway. So how's that business been going? I know that it's been something that you've been, working on for, has it been years now?
yeah, so I actually started that shortly before getting into the funeral industry. So it's kind of interesting that it ties in that way. I think we're going on 7 years of having an active Etsy shop and a little tiny online presence. And it really started more as just wanting to have something to kind of decompress. I love bath bombs myself, but there was never the fragrances I really wanted or the weird shapes that I really wanted. And I didn't do a lot of search on online for it. It was just more local stuff. But I needed a crafty hobby too. And so I started just making them for myself. And then there was some interest with friends and coworkers. And then I ended up doing farmers markets in town. And now I'm doing craft fairs and vending events, and just in my quote unquote spare time, because in our profession you have to schedule your spare time. Um, so yeah, we're going on 7 years, and it's really, I say we, but it's me. It's me alone in an extra room in my house, hand making them all, and then setting up my booths when I go to events.
Gotcha. Well, if anybody's in your area, I highly suggest that they check that stuff out. Also, check out your Etsy shop, all that type of thing. Yeah, I'm not a person who will like sell something or plug something just because like I actually have to like it. So,
So you
but
haven't
yeah,
even tried them yet, right? Is that what you're telling me?
yeah, yeah. So, but yeah, no, definitely do that. And that kind of ties into a funeral sort of topic that I had thought of in connection. And you actually mentioned it there. It's that idea of balance with what
Yeah.
we do. Like it can get very depressing, very sad, very weighing on the soul, metaphorical soul, I guess. But anyway, yeah, I don't know. Does that really kind of help balance you out? I feel like even outside of family and friends and stuff, it seems to be like there needs to be another creative process that's like creative and additive instead of just putting out fires and handling death.
Yes, definitely. I think it's like there's something really cathartic about just punching powder into a solid form, into the molds. But I've also really like it kind of blends back into Satanism too, with the intention and the alchemy and the ritual for me, because I set such intention. It's almost like my workshop is a ritual chamber in itself sometimes. Because I go in there, and maybe it's a recipe I've done 100 times because it's just really popular, but I go in with the intention of giving someone a moment of peace. Whether they know that that's what I'm doing, I'm creating that and I'm putting it out there. Um, and so getting to, as directors, we want to give someone a moment of solace, a moment of peace, but to also celebrate and to calm them. And then I can tie that into bath bombs too. It's all this like really interwoven thing for me. But it is, I make more of them than I actually use anymore. Um, but baths are also kind of my safe space, getting to just soak and relax and decompress. But when I've created the thing that I'm using, to also help myself relax. It's a full circle of calm for me.
That's great. Yeah, I have a similar thing, a similar tie-in. I think that I mentioned it in past episodes. We have a mutual friend who's also in the funeral industry that's also a big fan of professional wrestling. And for me, that's kind of my escape. And the tie-in for funeral stuff is that not only are you entertaining and doing things of that nature and having a good time, but you're also using those same skills to put on a wrestling show that you use to put on a funeral. You're still
Yeah,
scheduling, you're still figuring out what looks the best, but it's a more positive outcome than a sad one all the time.
absolutely. And I actually have one of the anniversary Undertaker belts in my office
Yeah.
that was given to me as a birthday present because he debuted as the Undertaker the day after I was born.
Oh,
So
that's awesome.
that'll give you a glimpse into how young I am. Um, but then he was also announced to go into the Hall of Fame, I think, the week that I got my license and passed my state boards. So it
That,
was just this wonderful little chain of events there.
so that made sense. I'm thinking about the picture that you're referencing, and the hat and the pallbearer gold urn and all of that. That's super awesome.
And that urn is actually my best friend who really got me into wrestling. He did pass, and so while I was a professional, he passed, and I have his urn, and he specifically chose that urn to be the pallbearer urn.
Oh,
So
that's so cool, man. That's yeah, that's awesome. That on like multiple levels. So yeah. Wonderful. Well, hey, I do have a few other kind of like things I wanted to talk about more funeral wise. 'Cause that's
absolutely.
kind of why people tune into the show, I think. And we had talked a little bit earlier about kind of funeral aesthetics and how they've changed over the years. One thing, if anybody gets onto any of your social media and all that stuff, you've got a very distinctive style kind of on how you dress, how you carry yourself, that sort of thing. Um, and I think that that fits in very well with funeral stuff and with kind of the satanic, I don't know what you'd say, aesthetic principles. They can be
Yeah,
anything you
yeah.
want, but certainly I think a lot of us kind of gravitate to that darker side of things. So do you have any like huge pet peeves when it comes to like how a funeral is set up? It could be anything from like, oh, I hate that flower arrangement that everyone orders to, oh man, I really hate that casket. Like, why do they even come up with that color of casket? Is there anything that pops in your mind that you just kind of despise aesthetically with funerals?
So many of them. And actually, because of you mentioned my personal aesthetic, I'm sitting in the back of my personal hearse recording this right now, just so that you've got that image. So there's a hearse parked in my front yard, and it is my own hearse, which was a dream come true. Um, so there's my personal aesthetic there. But it's mostly about the songs. There are some songs that I'm sure that you're like, I can sing it in my sleep, and I don't ever want to hear it again. Um, and aesthetically, it's floral arrangements that have it's called asparagus fern. They're just these like really fine little ferns that shed everywhere and they stick to any casket. So like the middle casket, you can't
Yes.
unsee. I hate it. Um, there is a blue casket that is so popular, and it's the one with the seagulls that says "Going Home."
Yep, we sell a lot of that one. Yeah.
I hate that one so much because I hate the idea of the seagulls on the inside of the lid over someone's face.
Yeah, it's weird things like that that, people are always asking us like about weird things and weird tangents and weird stories. And I find that it's until I'm talking to someone else in the business, they don't really even pop up in my head.
Yeah.
But like when you just said that earlier today, I was helping get a deceased dressed with a student that we're working with, and I always put socks on the deceased person.
Sure.
Like just as a matter of course, we have clean, fresh socks that we always just have in supply. If they don't want to wear shoes, cool. And the student asked, like, "Why do you do that?" And I was like,
Mhm.
I had to think about it, and I'm like, "'Cause I don't want their feet to get cold," which is which is completely, like a thing that I've never really brought up to the surface before.
Right.
Uh,
And I have families who will say, do we need to give them socks, or we're bringing them socks because we don't want their feet to get cold. And I'm like, whatever makes you happy. Or the families who will be like, well, should we bring her a bra? And I said, if my family buried me in a bra, I would haunt them.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
those little things.
Let's see. Going back to your hearse, I kind of scrolled through some of your social media stuff today just to kind of prepare for the show, and
Fair enough.
I realized that that was actually your hearse. Like I didn't know. Like I'd seen the pictures of you in it before, but like I didn't know if that was like your firm's hearse or whatever. Uh,
No,
but
that's
yeah,
mine.
you have like, and I know that is that like your dream hearse? Because mine is, I love the 1970s style. Like if I were,
Mid 60s was always my dream, and black. Like if I could have had one of the Phantasm hearses, I would have been
oh
golden.
yeah,
Um, but this was a good friend of mine used to work for a casket company in town. His dad actually owns a funeral home, um, semi locally, and they let me borrow it for Halloween one year because it was an extra one for them. They just had kind of in storage at one of their ancillary locations, and then like the next year, almost year, coming up before Halloween, they were like, hey, do you want to buy it? Dad's getting a new one, a slightly newer than the one that you borrowed. And then it's just going to be another extra hearse for him. And they offered me this astronomically good price for it. And I handed over a whole lot of money. And while it may not be the exact year, and white was not always my dream, but her name is Wisp, like Will of the Wisp. She has a purple velvet interior, and I don't think you can do much better than that for me because purple and velvet is kind of my dream there. So she's pretty perfect for not having that dream 60s hearse.
nice, nice. And then another thing, kind of one of my funeral aesthetic things that I wish would really come back, and that's my next question for you. So have that in your head. Is there anything from like funeral service past that you wish would come back? But mine are like the very cool flower cars for
Oh
processions. Yeah, like with
yeah.
the glass bubbles and all that stuff and like the big windows and yeah, I wish that they would bring those back. Same in
I wish Yeah. I wish we had those back, but I don't like the hearses that are all windows in the back where there's not even like curtains or the panels where you can really see in, like the newer ones. Not a fan of those, but I like the flower cars. It's a different aesthetic that way.
Oh yeah, certainly. Yeah, I'm exactly in the same boat. Have you ever like I don't it's not something you'd probably sell. Ever dealt with those clear caskets before?
No, but I do have an acrylic casket coffin because the lid isn't hinged, that was used in a university theater group, in not in town but in the state. I think it was used for like Snow White, so it's like an acrylic coffin with the handles and everything, but then it's built on a rolling rack. That's just in my house, and I use it for Halloween because I collect caskets and coffins like the goth weirdo that I am.
I'm literally sitting in our selection room right now. So I'm like surrounded by caskets, but
That's the news we had. We don't have a selection room. We don't. It's all digital for us. We have some urns on hand, but we don't have actual selection room. Um, I I wish the event center look would go away already. They keep trying to turn all of our locations into more of an event center rather than the pews and the dark heavy woods and the classic chapel.
yeah.
Um, I don't like it.
That's another thing we discussed, and I'm exactly in the same vein. I'm very like blessed, I guess you would say, to work where I work. I love the aesthetic of this place. It's kind of your what most people would think of as your crazy Victorian Adams family house,
Yeah.
type of vibe with just a chapel added onto it.
Oh,
Uh,
beautiful.
yeah. So, and I think this might pop up for people, and I think about this a lot too. Um, as Satanists, why are we so like like for having like a classic chapel and things like that. Do you have any thoughts on why that's kind of the aesthetic that we as funeral directors find the most effective?
I think it's clearly the aesthetics and the pageantry. I think so much of like our ritual chambers tend to be pageantry and ceremony and very intentional places. And so when you walk into a funeral chapel, you know what that is. You don't think you're walking in to a wedding reception or a birthday party or something. It's a funeral chapel. And a funeral can look so many different ways. It can be a celebration of life, it can be less religious and more free flow. Um, but it's still the intention is in that area. And I think by turning these into event centers, we're losing that intention a lot. And I don't want it to be a wedding reception in my funeral chapel. I want my organ and I want some of my pews and I want the big skylights and high ceilings.
I agree completely. It's just I always tell people, you know, and it again, you always hear the idea nowadays of like we don't want a funeral, we want a celebration of life. And I think that that's the funeral industry's kind of curtailing to that demographic, if you will. I know it's cold to call grieving families a demographic, but uh, I
But there's ways to do that with all, you can honor that desire for them, but also not whitewash and bland out the
yes,
area that we're doing it.
yep, and I completely agree. I also think that it's important to understand for all of our listeners out there who might be going through, you know, having to plan a funeral or are possibly planning their own funeral, that it's important for your family to hurt during that time.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
Like, and I don't know if you ever feel this way, but it's part of my job to figure out how to hurt your family most effectively during during the time that that funeral starts to when that funeral ends. Like, I need them to be the most messed up and grieving at that point so they can start the healing after the fact.
Yes. Like I just had a service over the weekend where they had just kind of given me general music, and the minute the next of kin walked in to, before anything started, and we did more of a general celebration of life. We did it in our reception room and we had food and it was a little more loose. But the minute she walked in, we had arranged things that were all just her loved one. They just screamed her loved one, and the music, she started crying, just started crying. And that's when I know I've done my job right, because I've brought their person into that moment. They've gone through their checklists, they've done it all. Now they can start that process. And I can speak for that personally because I lost my dad in January of this year, and I worked, like I took maybe a week off, but was immediately dealing with another funeral director in a different town, um, through my same company because I'm corporate, you're not.
Yeah.
But dealing with the same thing. And then I went back to work, and it wasn't until I was starting to do the details of dad's service, which we held off for 6 months for, that then I was actually starting to process the grief. And now it's hitting harder as like the holidays are coming up, the things that make me think of him, because I didn't allow myself to hurt. I was the jumping in and I did work brain and I was doing all the things that I should have been doing as an employee, not as the person who lost their loved one.
Yeah, I can relate. My grandfather passed back when I first started mortuary school and was, you know, he was very, very close to me. I actually spoke at his funeral and said that he was my
Wow.
second father, you know. But I did that exact same thing where I couldn't not do the funeral. I did everything. I even embalmed him.
Oh,
Yeah, like I did with my preceptor present. I don't want to get in trouble. But
Yeah.
yeah, but it was, I experienced that exact same thing. And do you think as funeral directors and funeral personnel, it's difficult for us to handle our own people, across the board? I know I see that. Have you seen that in other people besides yourself?
Uh, I always tell families that working in the industry doesn't prepare us for our own loss. So we deal with how many deaths a year. And even if it's friends or colleagues or tangential relations, it doesn't prepare you for that deep loss. But my best friend that I had the urn from, he went through a different agency in town. He specifically chose that and pre-planned, because pre-planning is the best thing you can ever do for your family. um, he didn't want me to have him in my place of work. So, and he had worked in the industry too, so he kind of had um, that forethought for me. And yeah, I think we don't allow ourselves to grieve. In many cases, we have to be the problem solvers, or people expect us to be the problem solvers because we have all the insight and the knowledge. So they lean on us when we should be allowed to be letting ourselves hurt. And sometimes we force that upon ourselves to not hurt. I think across the board, most of my colleagues haven't dealt well with their own um, loved ones passing either. They kind of shut down, or just force through and work. So
Gotcha. You were mentioning music, and I certainly don't mean to shovel everything we were just saying under the rug, but I have squirrel brain sometimes.
yep.
And you were mentioning like music that's just, like examples of what we're talking about is like how great thou art, old rugged cross, amazing grace,
Over the
whatever that.
rainbow. I'm so
Yeah,
tired of over the
yeah.
rainbow.
What's that one about? There's floor or holes in the floor of heaven. Like, you know, they're
Yeah.
just yeah. Have you ever had a song that was just so outrageous that it was either like funny or just like you couldn't believe that somebody played it during a service or wanted it played during a service?
Oh my goodness, there's been several. And it was for like, I think it was like a Taylor Swift song, but it was one of the more poppy ones. And it was for like a 95-year-old woman's service. And I was like, what are we doing? Because I make the playlist for the families, and then I coordinate all of the playing and the timing. And like, but we had Dr. Pepper at her service too. So it was just kind of a fun thing. But
Nice.
yeah, there have definitely been somewhere I was like, is this appropriate? Okay. I guess that's up to you guys.
Yeah. And I definitely don't want to be the guy who's like, "Oh, you have to have rules to your funeral." You do not, folks. I'm a Satanist. You can do whatever the fuck you want. And I'm happy to help you. But I think the craziest one for me that just hit on another level, and it was a very sad circumstance where a young person had passed away in an auto accident, and
Oh.
the family insisted on playing "Jesus Take the Wheel."
Oh,
Yeah,
I
exact. Yeah, that's uh yeah, I didn't try to talk him out of it, but I just had a very hard time with that, and I still remember it to this day. So,
makes that something in the orange song. Have you had that at any services?
the Orange song?
Yeah, it's like something in the orange, I think is what it's called. And it's definitely about like addiction and things like that. And we had it at a person's service where that was the case. And that was the first time I heard that, and I was listening to the lyrics very carefully and just went, wow, okay, we're just gonna acknowledge it that way.
Yeah. But from a kind of a satanic standpoint, that is a hell of a piece of lesser magic, isn't it? Like if everyone in that room knows that that person died of an overdose, and uh, it just and then that plays, everyone just is going to automatically feel what they need to feel at that point.
Yeah, yeah, that is definitely some lesser magic there. Yeah,
Oh,
that's true. And I think that's the thing that I like more is when they're not going up and just martyring the person that's up there and saying, I like when there's some realism to the stories of, he was kind of a dick sometimes, but we loved him for this. Like that feels more personal than just talking phenomenally about a person that some people didn't really like sometimes.
Exactly. Well, Kat, we're going to take a short break here. When we come back, we'll kind of finish up our conversation. This has been wonderful so far. We'll be right back with more Undertaking Satan. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into this edition of Undertaking Satan. I want to talk about the best way to get in touch with your old buddy Grendal here. That will be by emailing into undertakingsatan@gmail.com. You can get into Grendal's mailbag that way if you have a question, comment, concern, diatribe, what have you. Also, please check out undertakingsatanpodcast.com. That's our landing page. You can find a bunch of cool stuff there, including our featured satanic podcasts. That's right, folks. If you love what you're hearing on Undertaking Satan, there's much more out there of that variety. Specifically, I'd like to mention Satan's Plain with Magister Bill M., which is a wonderfully didactic and educational show on everything Satanism. Magister Bill M. has been a champion for satanic thought in the public sphere for a very long time, and it's always wonderful to hear his ideas on various topics. And coming soon to the Undertaking Satan landing page, we have the Neutral Wisdom podcast with Warlock Robert Shirley. I'm proud to say that I was recently a guest on this podcast. It was a wonderful format where Warlock Shirley takes some of his writing and showcases that at the beginning of the episode, and then expands on those writings with the subsequent interview. Had a lot of fun over there. I think you guys will too. And of course, if you're looking for anything related to the Church of Satan, you need to go to churchofsatan.com. That's the only official source of the Church of Satan on the web. Over there you can find a lot having to do with the philosophy and the rules and all of the things that the Church of Satan is about. And without further ado, let's get back to the interview. All right, everyone, we are back with Kat. Kat, I'd like to go back to As You Like It real quick. Could you just plug your stuff so people know where to find you?
Yeah. And I'm just going to applaud you really well for pronouncing it right. Did you study that one or just did you guess?
I think I had heard you say it on another podcast. Or maybe I guessed. I don't know.
Well, good job. No one ever gets it right. Because one of my pseudonyms elsewhere is Like It. So the Like It part of As You Like It, that's where it came from. And I get called Lick It a lot, and just not good things. But As You Like It Bath, I have an Etsy shop under the same name, and then I've got an Instagram, and then I tend to, anytime there's a podcast that I'm talking about, plug in the bath bombs, or someone did an unboxing video for me. It's all in the link tree in the Instagram, so people can go back and watch and listen and do those kinds of things. But if you know where I am locally, there's craft fairs. So I post about that on the Instagram a lot when I do venture out to those. There's been far more this year than there have been in the past. So keeping myself busy with those.
Let's see. So back to funeral stuff. You mentioned it a little bit that we're kind of on two separate sides of the fence when it comes to corporate versus smaller funeral home type of thing. Have you ever thought about working in a smaller spot? Is there not many around? Do you really like kind of the structure and stuff where you're at?
That's an interesting question. I've never worked in a smaller one. I started in corporate. I've got a connection in a smaller privately owned one, and while I don't really know how their day-to-day differs from mine, the people seem a little less corporate-y, obviously. I don't we have most of the funeral homes here are, I believe, corporately owned. Even if it's like a local corporation, it's still a corporation. I think maybe there's one or two directly in town that are privately owned, and then there's a few in the outlying areas that are privately owned. It's enticing, but I'd have to kind of dip my toe in it to see how used to all of the programs I've gotten, because I have a lot of things that make my day a little easier because I don't have to think too hard. Like making service folders. We have a program we use. I don't have to try super duper hard on that one, but I do try to make them personalized. But I don't know how I do without all of my cheat codes.
Yeah, I used to work in one that was kind of as you it's the biggest one in my area, but it's a corporation, but it's also family owned, if that makes sense. Kind of a
Okay.
corporation on paper. So I've kind of seen like both sides of it, and yeah, there's pros and cons to each. But what I do like about my area is, and where I'm at, is that I'm pretty much my own boss. As long as I don't do anything to catastrophically get us sued or make any, terrible decisions, I can pretty much do whatever I want. So that's kind of the better part. I think that pay is probably about the same. You know, all of that stuff. How many
Yeah.
families do you meet with a day
I
generally?
try to, so I'm the only funeral director in my location. And I heard you talk on, was it Neutral Wisdom, about you're not going to get rich making being a funeral director, and that is so painfully true.
Yeah,
Um, um, because I'm the only one, and for the sake of my sanity, I do maybe two a day, sometimes three if I'm pushing it, but that doesn't mean I'm not interacting with a slew of other families constantly when I'm not actively in an arrangement with a family. At any given time, I have close to a dozen cases I'm working on. But I stick solely in the front, so I have a care team that does my cremations and my embalmings. Um, but I have to give them all the things they need to be able to do the job so that I can do my job.
right. And that's what was difficult for me was juggling so many different families at one time because back when I worked at the larger firm, my caseload was very similar to what you're saying. So,
Yeah.
and just to give people an idea of what we're talking about, do you like have a roundabout estimate of how many calls you guys take a year?
Um, I think I looked at our contract numbers for last year, and that could be cremations, merchandise only, service only, or burial or ship outs. I think we had close to 150 cases last year.
Gotcha, gotcha. And that's yeah, about what I do here in a year too. Um, but yeah, the old place that I worked, it was they did in one city over 1,000 a year. So they're pretty
Yeah.
much the only game in town. But yeah, and I just think it's important for folks to understand kind of like behind the scenes, like what's the difference between that small place and that corporate firm with all the different locations and things like that. Not a
Well,
lot of
that's
people get
just
to hear that
my contract
conversation.
load for my location is the 150 overall because we have multiple direct cremation locations that
Oh yeah,
utilize
yeah,
our
I gotcha.
center. Um, we I'm sure that it's far more because those direct cremation ones, they're contract machines.
Yep, yeah. So, uh, yeah, I don't know. It's a fun kind of thing seeing the how people live on the other side of the fence. So,
Well, in different regions too. Like my area is not a huge town, but it's pretty large. So it kind of depends on your city size too.
certainly, yeah, it does. Um, well, let's see. I My last kind of question I wanted to talk about is I get the majority of my questions by far is folks wanting to go to mortuary school. Um,
Mhm.
and they're just kind of looking for advice, looking for what to expect, looking for kind of an opinion if, I think they got the goods in order to do it, that sort of thing. Um, Did how was your mortuary school experience? How would you rate it on a scale of 1 to 10? Let's put it that way.
I didn't go to mortuary school. It is not required in my state to go to mortuary school if you're just going to be a director.
Oh,
So,
okay.
I have an associate's degree in communications and humanities. So, I
Uh-huh.
focus in communication and psychology and sociology. Um, and then I just had to do a year-long internship and then pass my boards. So
Gotcha.
I didn't have to go to mortuary school. I did my schooling and my internship simultaneously,
Oh, that's
and it
cool.
was during the pandemic, so I got to do all my school online and in downtime in the office. You know, when we couldn't meet with families in person, anyways. Um, at least here we couldn't. So I stressed myself out a lot doing that,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's not required if you're not going to be actually in the embalming and prep room. Yeah.
And that's why I tell folks anytime I speak on this stuff, it's so different state by state, and outside of the United States, I have no idea. So,
Right.
yeah, so Kat just talked about in her area what it looks like to be a funeral director. In my area, we have the two licenses as well, but everyone has to go to mortuary school, has to complete a program, even if you just want to be a funeral director.
And I
Um,
think so many people want to just be in the back in the prep room. I think um there's a lot of glamour people assume back there, which is weird and just weird. But I feel like we are just in desperate need for people in the front of the house in our area, more so than the people who are actively trying to be in the back.
Yep. And that's kind of the advice that I give folks. And I'm just going to ask you this question. Like, if you just had a person walk in and be just like, hey, I want to work in the front office and just like do little things for you, would that be wonderful?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I have an admin. Um, I have an admin, and she's pretty much the best ever. It doesn't hurt that she's my best friend too. And I got her hired, but our in-office community, like chemistry, is just fantastic. Because I feel comfortable delegating things to her and knowing that the families are being taken care of, so that I can jump onto the things that she can't do that require a license. So having someone just help around the office a little bit is really the greatest treasure, because I went without for a really long time when it was just me trying to do everything. So it's really nice to have help.
Gotcha. And like that's what I tell people, if anybody wants to like get into the business, do that first. Like just kind of you got to kind of hang around and be in the environment and then like work up to touching a dead person and then working up to maybe like, doing the unlicensed stuff and then go into it. I feel a lot of people go full bore too fast and they'll pay thousands upon thousands of dollars for mortuary school and then they get into a funeral home and they don't last a year, and you just waste
Yeah.
a bunch of money. So
And I actually started as we have a position here, just the funeral attendant. So the person who comes in just to help the director for the service. You hand out the flyers, you point where the bathroom is. I started doing that. I started at the bottom of the barrel there, the most part time we could. Did that, learned the crematory, and then was given my intern um, opportunity. So you really need to see if you can even be comfortable around a fully made up dead person before you decide to jump into the back and get your hands dirty.
correct, yes. um well, that's wonderful, Kat. That's really kind of all I had on the docket for like questions, but as you have any questions for me, anything else you want to talk about, I'm pretty much an open book. I'm having a lot of fun having a conversation with someone else in the business across the United States from me, so anything you want to know, have at it.
Um, oh goodness. Oh, do you do a lot in, like, is there a prevalent religion in your area that you serve mostly?
So mostly in my area where I'm at now, it's primarily 100% Protestant Christian,
Wow.
lot of Southern Baptists, that sort of stuff. My
Okay.
previous firm was more of a mixed bag. That's where I got everything from, a lot of Buddhists in that area,
Hmm.
um, some Hindus in that area. And then it was pretty much divided Catholic, Protestant 50-50 on what you were going to get during a day. I had a lot of biker funerals there too. So it was a lot more exciting in that bigger city. But yeah, here I'm pretty much primarily Southern Baptist. Yeah.
Okay. We serve quite a range, but we actually have a huge Slavic population. Um, so you learn specific words and you can kind of tell where they are in a service when you hear those words. We have a lot of the Hmong culture, so Vietnamese refugee kind of families, and those are 3-day services, which are really culturally impressive to watch and to be part of. And then my location had a long history with tribal families, and I've gotten to keep that up. So I serve a lot of tribal families in our area. So
That's
that's
awesome.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
That's one
definitely
of
a different mindset.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite parts is, doing new and exciting things and serving different religions, which I think everyone I've ever talked to finds it weird that I'm a Satanist and that's, what I'm all about. But I explain it as, hey, I get to put on a different show every day. And when those shows are more diverse, it's more fun for me.
Yeah, well, and it's wisdom too. You're gaining knowledge and wisdom, and um, the more we know, the better. So we don't have to. And I think putting on that show is I I can meld into any kind of family really, and I'm a Satanist at heart. I tuck the Baphomet at work every day, um, but I can be neutral enough that I can serve such a vast array of families, and I think that's an impressive thing to me.
I see. I see. I did think of one more question just as we were
Yeah.
sitting here chatting. Um, so another thing that people don't understand is that I think is that actually the funeral service industry in the past years has become dominantly female. Is that the case where you're at as well?
Oh my goodness. We have one male funeral director in our little grouping. Um, oh no, sorry. We have, if we don't count the direct cremation places, we have one. If you count the direct cremations, we have three. So,
Gotcha.
yes, it is our almost all of our care centers, so our embalming and care and cremation team is almost all female. Almost all of our management is female, and then all of our directors and intern directors are female.
Gotcha. Yep. I think it was, well, I mean, I guess technically at the firm I'm at here, I work with my significant other. So I guess we're 50-50 technically, right? Um,
Technically.
Yeah, but at the larger firm I was at, I think it was about two-thirds female to one-third male. So
Wow.
I think that's just kind of a fun fact that a lot of people, everyone thinks it's kind of a boys' club, but it's really kind of the opposite. So
When I came in, it was all older white Christian men. But I learned a lot of my love of the aesthetics from them. I learned the just the things I hold on to that are very old school, but I think that make for a great care of a family and a great service from them. But it is drastically more female now.
very much so, yeah. Do you have any other examples of those little old school tricks? I mean, I have a couple in my head, but just those things that you do that are just kind of antiquated, but you still hold value.
Um, there's been a lot of kind of casual dress on service days that I've noticed. But when I was trained as an attendant, it was white button up, blazer, black pants. You stand in the corner, you're quiet, but you're accessible for the families. Um, you're just always at the ready. And that is, I still, it might not always be a white button up, it may be more of a blouse with buttons, but I'm always going to wear buttons on a service day. That is where I am. And just the precision of the timing and the talking to the pastor or the officiant, and just things I learned from them, how to talk to families, how to care for families, when the coach should be clean and ready, and how the front step should be swept and the lights should all be changed. And it's setting up that show. And I don't know that that's necessarily maintained constantly.
No, it's certainly not. I don't know the right word, but it feels, yeah, I just don't know the right word. It feels more sanitized instead of perfectionist. I don't
Yeah.
know if that makes sense, but
Yes, absolutely.
yeah, I know that the person that I learned from was super old school, probably OCD. But like there were just things like that I carry over, and some of them are kind of brutal. Like one of his rules was overcoats are not allowed. Like you dress in your suit, and that's what you're in all of the time. No gloves, no coat, no hat. It doesn't matter if it's 10 below zero at burial, you're going to get frostbite. He'll pay for the frostbite. He won't pay for you disrespecting the family. Um, like,
we do overcoats because we do get quite a bit of snow, and all
yeah,
of the people we learned from did overcoats too. But
yeah,
yeah, no, that's pretty brutal.
it is brutal. But like, I was trained that way so hard that now I still don't wear a coat, but I put my hands in my pockets and I feel like a bad boy. Like,
Yes,
yeah. And
your
that's,
hands should either be clasped in front of you or behind your back. No pockets.
yeah, stuff like that. Other little things that I do, and this is more kind of on the prep side, I guess, but like if somebody's wearing a watch, I make sure it's set to the correct time. If that watch is dead, I set it to the time of death.
Yes.
Um, just little things like that. Like a lot of people won't know what we're talking about, but caskets have a thing called an apron,
Mm-hmm.
that's it's on top of the casket, and then it's placed in the casket when it's closed. I was always taught, like, you don't fold it up like people do now. You use it like a blanket over the person, and then if they're wearing glasses, you always take their glasses off and put it in their hand. Just like weird little things like that. So
I was
um,
always taught to fold the apron in thirds, but it's very crisp, clean lines, and then you tuck it on top
yeah,
of them. So
yeah. Oh, here, have you ever dealt with an active death military funeral?
no, no, I haven't done that one, but it feels like every military funeral, they have different regulations that they tell me each time.
Yeah, I think that's just kind of the military in general. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's a whole nother topic. Man, we could go on for hours. I don't think we should. But anyway, Kat, is there anything else that you'd like to finish up on kind of before we end the podcast today?
Oh, pre-plan. Do your families a
Pre-plan.
favor and pre-plan. But like you said, on the other episode, I was told I needed to listen to it because you mentioned me, and I was like, okay,
Oh, I
this is
did.
what
I
I
forgot I mentioned you. Sorry about that. Generally, I let people know.
and cool. It was good homework. Don't over plan. Don't do every little song that you want played because, like you said, the family needs something to do to help them grieve. I love when families write their own obituaries because there's always that person's humor laced into it. But prepay for things, please. Please
Yeah,
prepay for things.
helps a lot. So,
It
yeah,
helps a lot. So, and then just, grief doesn't have a timeline. Um, I just, that's the thing I've had to drive home to my mom as she's been dealing with the grief. There's not a structure in the way that you should be feeling in a certain amount of time. The stupidest thing is going to pop up and punch you in the face and make you cry at the worst time possible. And it could be something like French fries, but that doesn't mean that your grief isn't valid. So I think that's my biggest advice to families, to people listening to us who may be in the industry or not. I'm a terrible person and haven't pre-planned my own, but I harped on both my in-laws and my parents, and it's been a good thing to have. So,
Gotcha.
and buy bath bombs and relax.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
that too. They're good folks, I promise. So,
well, now
all right,
you have
Kat.
to buy something to actually use. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, Kat, thank you so much for being on. I appreciate it. Thanks everyone for tuning in and listening. Please check out everything that Kat has to offer. I'm going to go ahead and put all those links in the description of the video. Until next time, hail Satan. Bye now.